I watched in real time as the European Union walked straight into the most sophisticated political trap in modern history. What I witnessed at 1443 Brussels time wasn't just a policy miscalculation. It was a strategic ambush that has left the entire continent exposed, vulnerable, and scrambling for survival. Ursula von der Leyen entered the emergency session believing she held the upper hand. The confidence in her stride, the way she arranged her papers with mechanical precision, the slight smile as cameras focused on her podium. She had no idea she was about to trigger the collapse of everything Brussels had built over 7 decades. The trap had been set months in advance. While European leaders celebrated their latest climate initiatives and digital sovereignty programs, hostile actors were quietly maneuvering pieces on a geopolitical chessboard. The bait was irresistible. A $340 billion infrastructure deal that promised to cement EU influence across 3 continents. Von der Leyen took it, hook, line, and sinker. I was there when the first domino fell. At exactly 1447, Hungarian Representative Viktor Orbán stood up during what should have been a routine budget approval session. Instead of the expected procedural comments, he placed a single document on the podium. The header read, Strategic Dependencies Analysis, Classification Level, EU Eyes Only. The document wasn't supposed to exist in public. Internal EU memos later confirmed this was highly classified material from the Commission's own Strategic Autonomy Task Force. How Orbán obtained it remains a mystery that has intelligence officials across Europe working around the clock. Von der Leyen's face went pale the moment she recognized the document. This wasn't about Ukraine funding or migration quotas. This was about the systematic infiltration of European supply chains by adversarial powers. The numbers were devastating. In their rush to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, EU member states had unknowingly handed over control of critical infrastructure to entities with questionable loyalties. Orbán read from the leaked analysis with surgical precision. Critical mineral dependencies, 73% rare earth elements sourced through Chinese-controlled supply chains. Battery production capacity, 84% reliant on manufacturing facilities with direct state backing from Beijing. Semiconductor fabrication, 91% dependent on facilities within 200 kilometers of potential conflict zones. The chamber fell silent. Even the most ardent supporters of European integration understood the implications immediately. In pursuing green independence from Russian energy, the EU had sleepwalked into an even more dangerous dependency. The infrastructure deal von der Leyen had celebrated just weeks earlier wasn't European autonomy, it was economic vassalage disguised as partnership. But the trap went deeper than supply chain vulnerabilities. The leaked document revealed something even more troubling. Internal communications showed EU officials had been aware of these risks for 18 months. Risk assessments dated back to March 2025 clearly outlined the strategic vulnerabilities. Yet the Commission had pushed forward anyway, prioritizing political optics over national security. Von der Leyen attempted damage control, claiming the analysis was preliminary and taken out of context. Her voice carried none of its usual authority. These assessments represent worst-case scenarios, she insisted, not current realities. But her defense crumbled when Orbán produced a second document, procurement contracts showing the EU had already committed $127 billion to infrastructure projects controlled by the very entities the secret analysis had flagged as security risks. The room erupted. French Representative Marine Le Pen demanded immediate suspension of all pending contracts. German AfD members called for a vote of no confidence. Even traditionally pro-EU factions sat in stunned silence as the scale of the strategic blunder became clear. I watched von der Leyen's hands shake as she shuffled through her prepared remarks. None of her talking points addressed the fundamental question. How had the European Union's most senior leadership walked into such an obvious trap? The answer, according to the leaked documents, lay in a combination of bureaucratic compartmentalization and willful ignorance. Different departments within the Commission had been working in silos. The Trade Directorate celebrated increased economic partnerships. The Climate Directorate hailed progress toward carbon neutrality. The Digital Directorate praised new technological cooperation agreements. None had been communicating the full strategic picture to the others. Or if they had, those communications had been deliberately suppressed. Orbán pressed his advantage, reading from internal emails that showed Commission officials had been warned repeatedly about the concentration risks. One memo, dated September 2025, explicitly stated, "Current trajectory creates single point of failure vulnerabilities that could be exploited during geopolitical tensions." The memo had been buried in committee and never reached senior leadership, or so von der Leyen claimed. The trap's sophistication became apparent as more details emerged. European negotiators had been systematically outmaneuvered during trade discussions. What appeared to be favorable terms for green technology transfers actually contained hidden clauses that gave foreign entities veto power over European production capacity. The $340 billion infrastructure deal wasn't just expensive, it was a surrender of economic sovereignty disguised as investment partnership. Financial markets reacted instantly to the leaked revelations. The euro dropped 2.3% against the dollar within minutes of the news breaking. European energy stocks tumbled as investors realized the continent's energy security remained fundamentally compromised. Bond yields spiked as markets priced in the cost of unwinding disastrous infrastructure commitments. Von der Leyen attempted to regain control of the narrative, announcing an immediate review of all strategic partnerships. But the damage was already done. The leaked documents had revealed the EU's negotiating positions for dozens of ongoing trade discussions. Adversarial powers now knew exactly where European leaders were willing to compromise and where they would stand firm. The strategic implications extended far beyond economics. NATO officials privately expressed alarm that EU supply chain vulnerabilities could compromise alliance defense capabilities. If critical materials and components could be restricted during tensions, European military readiness would collapse within weeks. The continent that had spent decades building independence from Soviet energy had accidentally recreated the same vulnerabilities with different suppliers. Opposition leaders across Europe seized on the revelations to attack the EU's competence and legitimacy. Populist parties in Italy, Netherlands, and Poland used the leaked documents to argue that Brussels bureaucrats had sold out national interests for ideological purity. Pro-EU politicians found themselves defending the indefensible, systematic strategic negligence at the highest levels. As I watched von der Leyen's press conference later that evening, the full scope of the trap became clear. This wasn't just about bad policy decisions or bureaucratic incompetence. The leaked documents suggested a coordinated information operation designed to exploit European decision-making weaknesses. Key advisors and consultants involved in the infrastructure negotiations had connections to entities with clear financial interests in the deal's success. The Commission's own investigation would later reveal that several critical risk assessments had been altered or delayed during the review process. Technical experts who had raised concerns about dependency risks found their reports modified before reaching senior officials. Whistleblowers within the EU bureaucracy began coming forward with evidence of systematic suppression of inconvenient analysis. Von der Leyen announced her resignation effective immediately, claiming she had been misled by her own staff about the strategic risks. But the leaked documents painted a different picture, one of willful blindness and ideological capture that had left Europe exposed to economic coercion. Her departure triggered the deepest institutional crisis in EU history. The aftermath has been catastrophic for European unity. Member states are now reviewing every major EU initiative for hidden vulnerabilities. Trust between national governments and Brussels has collapsed. The infrastructure deals that were supposed to demonstrate European strength have instead exposed European weakness to the entire world. Markets continue pricing in the cost of unwinding these strategic mistakes. Estimates suggest it could take $500 billion and 5 years to rebuild genuinely independent supply chains for critical materials. European consumers will pay the price through higher energy costs and delayed green transitions. The continent that sought to lead on climate change may have inadvertently set back its own environmental goals by a decade. Intelligence officials across Europe are still investigating how the strategic documents were obtained and leaked. Early indications suggest a sophisticated operation that penetrated multiple levels of EU security. The leak wasn't random. It was precisely timed to cause maximum damage to European credibility and unity. As I write this, emergency sessions continue across European capitals. National security officials are conducting urgent reviews of all infrastructure partnerships. Trade negotiators are scrambling to identify which deals can be modified or canceled. Financial analysts are calculating the economic cost of strategic independence. The trap was brilliant in its simplicity. Offer European leaders everything they wanted: green technology, digital sovereignty, economic partnerships, while hiding the strategic costs until it was too late to change course. The EU walked willingly into economic dependency while believing it was achieving greater independence. What happens next will determine whether Europe can recover from this strategic disaster or whether the continent has permanently compromised its ability to act independently on the world stage. The leaked documents have given adversarial powers a roadmap for future exploitation. Trust between EU institutions and member states may never fully recover. This wasn't just a policy failure, it was a masterclass in strategic deception that has left the European Union weaker, more divided, and more vulnerable than at any point since its founding. The question now is whether European leaders have learned enough from this trap to avoid the next one. The silence from Brussels tonight speaks volumes. The empire of bureaucracy that once projected confidence and competence now appears vulnerable and uncertain. The strategic trap has been sprung, and Europe is still counting the cost.